My husband humiliated me at his family dinner, saying I'd never be successful. They all laughed as I clutched my business proposal in tears. 5 years later, I bought the company that rejected my ideas, and now his entire family works for me, but the real story is how they ended up begging for the very changes they once mocked. It was a brisk October morning when my assistant rushed into my office, her face flushed with excitement. "Ms. Williams, you need to see this immediately," she said, placing the morning's financial paper on my desk. I felt my heart skip a beat as I read the headline. Morrison Industries faces unprecedented crisis. Share prices plummet 60% overnight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The name of my former brother-in-law, Aaron Morrison, dominated the article, alongside quotes about their company's devastating collapse. Analysts were calling it one of the most dramatic corporate downfalls in recent history. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same family that had humiliated me at their dinner table 5 years ago, led by my ex-husband Gary, who had taken such pleasure in declaring my innovative business ideas worthless. I felt a complex mixture of emotions wash over me as I sat in my corner office, 40 stories above the bustling city streets. The Morrison family had once been my family too, until that fateful dinner when everything changed. Now, their once mighty business empire was crumbling, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Gary's mother, Audrey, who had smiled condescendingly as her son tore apart my proposals that night. His brother, Aaron, who had chuckled and called my ideas amateur hour. His sister, Stacy, who had whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear that I was embarrassing the family name. They were all about to learn a very important lesson about success and innovation. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I could see the Morrison Industries building in the distance, its once proud logo now seeming somehow diminished in the morning light. As I watched, my thoughts drifted back to that horrible night 5 years ago, the night that had changed everything. We had gathered at the Morrison family estate for what they called their quarterly family business dinner, a tradition that had always made me uncomfortable. It was meant to be a time when family members could discuss business matters openly, propose new ideas, and plan for the future. In reality, it was just another opportunity for them to reinforce their hierarchy and remind everyone of their supposed superiority. I had spent months preparing for that dinner, researching market trends, analyzing company weaknesses, and developing innovative solutions that could help modernize their outdated business practices. My proposal had focused on digital transformation, employee empowerment, and sustainable business practices, things that I knew, even then, would be crucial for any company wanting to survive in the changing business landscape. The crystal glasses had clinked, the silver had gleamed, and the air had been thick with the artificial warmth of forced family togetherness as I began my presentation. I'd been nervous but confident, believing in my ideas and their potential to help the company evolve. I can still hear Gary's laugh, sharp and cruel, cutting through the air as I finished speaking. "This is what you've been wasting your time on?" he had said, carelessly tossing aside the detailed reports I'd spent months preparing. Digital transformation? Employee-centric management? Environmental sustainability? These aren't just unrealistic. They're completely out of touch with how real business works. He had looked around the table then, encouraging others to join in his mockery, and they hadn't disappointed. The laughter that followed still echoes in my mind. Audrey's practiced society laugh, Aaron's derisive snort, Stacy's mean-spirited giggle. Even Stan, Gary's father and the company's founder, usually quiet and reserved, had allowed himself a small, dismissive smile. "The business world isn't a place for dreamers," Stan had said, his words carrying the weight of decades of supposed success. "It's about proven methods, tried and true practices. These new age ideas you're proposing, they're not how things work in the real world." I had sat there, my cheeks burning, my hands trembling beneath the pristine tablecloth, as Gary continued his public evisceration of my ideas. "This is exactly why you'll never succeed in business," he had declared, his voice dripping with contempt. "You don't understand how things really work. You think you can come in here with your idealistic proposals and revolutionize a company that's been successful for 3 generations?" The words had hit me like physical blows, each one carefully calculated to diminish and demean. But it wasn't just Gary's cruelty that hurt. It was the way the entire family had united in their contempt. Audrey had delicately dabbed her lips with her napkin before adding her own barb. "Darling, perhaps you should focus on more appropriate pursuits. Planning our charity galas, for instance. You do have such a knack for flower arrangements." The suggestion had been met with knowing chuckles around the table. Stacy had seized the moment to twist the knife further. "Really, it's almost cute. How you thought you could understand our business. Some people are born for this world and others should know their place." I remember staring down at my trembling hands, at the diamond ring Gary had placed on my finger 2 years earlier. A ring that now felt more like a shackle than a symbol of love. The detailed market research I'd compiled, the innovative solutions I'd developed, the careful analysis of their company's weaknesses, all of it dismissed without real consideration. Aaron had been particularly cruel in his dismissal. "Let me explain something to you," he had said, swirling his expensive wine with an air of superiority. "Morrison Industries didn't become a market leader by chasing every trendy new business concept. We succeeded because we understand that business is about power, about strength, about maintaining control. These soft ideas about employee satisfaction and environmental responsibility, that's not business, that's fantasy." Even now, 5 years later, sitting in my corner office, I could still feel the sting of their words. But that pain had long since transformed into something else: determination, strength, and an unwavering conviction that I had been right all along. As I held the morning's newspaper, reading about Morrison Industries' collapse, I couldn't help but note how every single problem they were facing could have been prevented if they'd listened to my proposals that night. Their tried-and-true methods had left them vulnerable to digital disruption. Their hierarchical management style had resulted in massive employee turnover. Their resistance to sustainable practices had cost them valuable contracts with environmentally conscious clients. My intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. "Ms. Williams," my assistant's voice came through. "The Morrison family representatives are here for the meeting." I took a deep breath, straightening my designer suit, so different from the demure dress I had worn to that dinner 5 years ago. "Send them in," I replied, my voice steady and confident. I knew what was coming. They were here to discuss a potential buyout, a last-ditch effort to save their company from complete collapse. What they didn't know was that I had been carefully positioning myself for this moment, building my company on all the principles they had mocked: innovation, employee empowerment, sustainable practices. Everything they had laughed at had become the foundation of my success. The sweet irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Every single one of my unrealistic proposals had proved prophetic. Digital transformation? They'd fallen behind their competitors. Employee-centric management? Their best talent had jumped ship years ago. Sustainable business practices? They'd lost millions in contracts to more environmentally conscious competitors. Now, here they were, about to walk into my office, not knowing that the woman they had once mocked would be the one deciding their fate. The woman they had tried to silence would now have the final word on their family's legacy. I stood up, walking to the window one last time before they entered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city skyline, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the faint sound of construction, the sound of old things being torn down to make way for the new. How fitting, I thought, straightening my shoulders and turning to face the door. The transformation was about to begin. The door opened, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But it wasn't the entire Morrison family as I had expected. It was just Audrey who entered first, her designer, suit looking slightly dated, her usual confident stride reduced to an uncertain shuffle. Behind her came Stan, Gary's father, looking older and more tired than I remembered. The absence of Gary and the others was conspicuous. "Thank you for meeting with us," Audrey began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. How different from the woman who had sat at that dinner table 5 years ago, smugly watching her son tear apart my dreams. "I assume you've seen the morning's news." "I have," I replied, remaining standing behind my desk. "Though I must admit, I'm surprised to see just the two of you. Where are Gary and Aaron? I would have thought they'd want to be here for such an important meeting." Stan cleared his throat uncomfortably. They don't know we're here," he admitted. "After what happened at the board meeting yesterday, they're not thinking clearly. We thought it would be better to explore our options quietly." The mention of the board meeting piqued my interest. I had heard rumors of a spectacular meltdown, of Gary throwing papers across the room when confronted with the extent of their financial crisis. How the mighty had fallen. Options? I kept my voice neutral, professional. "And what options would those be?" Audrey shifted in her seat, her perfectly manicured hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. "We've heard rumors that your company might be interested in acquiring certain assets of Morrison Industries." I allowed myself a small smile. "Rumors? Or have you finally read the market analysis I presented 5 years ago? The one that predicted exactly where Morrison Industries would end up if it didn't adapt to changing business realities?" The color drained from Audrey's face. She remembered that night, too, remembered how she had dismissed my concerns with a condescending laugh. "Things were different then," she said weakly. "No, Audrey, they weren't," I corrected her. "The problems were there, clear as day. I laid them out for all of you. The over-reliance on outdated business models, the resistance to digital transformation, the toxic corporate culture. You just chose not to listen." Stan leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. "We're listening now," he said quietly. "The company. It's not just about the Morrison name anymore. We have employees, families who depend on us. If we don't find a solution soon." I picked up a folder from my desk, one I had prepared months ago when I first noticed the signs of Morrison Industries' impending collapse. "You want to know what my company's interested in? Here's my preliminary proposal, as..." They reached for the folder. I held it back for a moment. "But before we go any further, I want to be clear about something. If we do this, it won't be a merger of equals. It won't be a partnership. It will be a complete takeover, with full restructuring rights." "But the Morrison name," Audrey began. "The Morrison name is part of the problem," I cut her off. "Your family's reputation for refusing to adapt, for valuing tradition over innovation, for treating employees like disposable resources. It's toxic in today's business world." I opened the folder and laid out several documents. "These are reports from your top 10 clients over the past 5 years. Notice a pattern? They're all complaining about the same things I warned you about that night. Outdated processes. Resistance to change. Poor employee retention leading to inconsistent service." Stan picked up one of the reports, his hands shaking slightly as he read. I could see the moment the reality hit him. Every criticism, every lost contract, every failed project could have been prevented if they'd just listened to me years ago. "We were wrong," he said finally, looking up at me. "About you, about the business, about everything. But please, help us save what we can." I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where the Morrison Industries building stood as a monument to outdated thinking. "I'm not interested in saving what was," I said finally. "I'm interested in building what could be. The question is, Are you ready to accept that everything you mocked me for was actually the solution you needed? The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken realizations. These two people, who had once been part of the chorus of laughter that drove me from their dinner table, were now sitting in my office, hoping I would save them from their own stubborn resistance to change. "What about Gary?" I asked finally. "And Aaron? Do you really think they'll accept my leadership after everything that's happened?" Audrey's laugh was bitter. "They don't have a choice anymore. The board is ready to remove them both after yesterday's incident. They just don't know it yet." I sat back down at my desk, pulling out another folder, this one containing my real plans for the Morrison Industries takeover. "Then let's discuss what happens next. But understand this. Everything changes. The management structure, the corporate culture, the business practices, everything they fought against, everything they mocked me for suggesting, it all gets implemented." As I began outlining my plans for transforming their company, I could see the dawning realization in their eyes. This wasn't just about a financial takeover. It was about completely dismantling the old Morrison way of doing business. The very changes they had laughed at 5 years ago were now their only hope for survival. The irony was almost poetic. I spent the rest of that morning outlining my vision for the transformed company. Every now and then, I'd catch Audrey flinching as I detailed another change that would dismantle their old way of doing business. Stan remained quiet, occasionally nodding as if finally understanding how far behind the times they had fallen. "The first thing to go will be the hierarchical management structure," I explained, pulling up a presentation on my office's wall screen. "No more decisions made in private family dinners, no more promotions based on last names rather than merit." The dig wasn't subtle, and Audrey's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. "Those dinners were a tradition." "Those dinners," I cut her off, "were symptomatic of everything wrong with your company. Do you know what happened after you all laughed at my proposals that night? I went home and started researching your competitors. Every single one that was outperforming Morrison Industries had already implemented the exact changes I suggested." I clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of Morrison Industries' declining market share over the past 5 years. While you were clinging to tradition, the business world was evolving. Digital transformation wasn't just a trendy buzzword, it was a necessity. Employee empowerment wasn't some soft, idealistic concept. It was the key to innovation and growth. Stan cleared his throat. "We understand that now. But surely some of our traditional practices have led you right here," I interrupted, gesturing to the financial reports spread across my desk. "To this office, asking the woman you once mocked to save your company from complete collapse." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. 5 years ago, they had sat in their palatial dining room, laughing at my ideas. Now they sat in my office, hoping those same ideas would save them from bankruptcy. My phone buzzed, a message from my assistant. Gary had just arrived in the lobby, apparently having learned about his father and mother's meeting with me. He was demanding to come up. "It seems we're about to have company," I said, showing them the message. "Your son doesn't appear to be taking this well." Audrey's face paled. "He can't know we're here. He'll never accept—" "He doesn't have a choice," I cut in firmly. "None of you do. Not anymore." I pressed the intercom. "Send him up. It's time we had this conversation." As we waited for Gary's arrival, I pulled out another document, one I'd been saving for this moment. "Before he gets here, you should know something. Over the past 5 years, I haven't just been building my own company. I've been watching yours, documenting every mistake, every missed opportunity, every failure of leadership." I handed them the report, a detailed analysis of how Morrison Industries had systematically rejected innovation, alienated talented employees, and clung to outdated business practices. Everything that's happening now, I predicted it that night at dinner. Not because I'm some business genius, but because I was willing to see what you all refused to acknowledge. The elevator's ding announced Gary's arrival. Through my office's glass walls, I could see him storming down the hallway, his face red with anger. How different he looked from the confident man who had once dismissed my ideas with such casual cruelty. The door flew open, and there he stood, my ex-husband, the man who had once told me I'd never understand business. His expensive suit couldn't hide how the years of stress and arrogance had aged him. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, glaring at his parents before turning his fury on me. "Some kind of hostile takeover?" I remained seated, calm in the face of his anger. "No, Gary. This is what happens when you refuse to listen, refuse to adapt, refuse to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, your wife wasn't as worthless as you thought." The color drained from his face as the meaning of my words sank in. You're the one buying our company?" "Buying what's left of it," I corrected him. "After you and Aaron finished running it into the ground with exactly the kind of outdated thinking I warned you about 5 years ago." He turned to his parents, betrayal written across his features. "And you're helping her? Betraying your own son?" "We're trying to save what's left," Stan said quietly. "She's offering us a chance to—" "A chance?" Gary's laugh was bitter. "Don't. You see what she's doing? This is revenge. She's using our moment of weakness to implement every change you mocked me for suggesting," I finished for him. "Every innovation you dismissed. Every improvement you laughed at. And do you want to know the really ironic part? If you had listened to me that night, none of this would be happening now." I stood up, walking around my desk to face him directly. "Your company is failing not because of market conditions or bad luck, but because you were too proud to admit that someone else, your wife no less, might understand modern business better than you did." Gary stood there, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form a response. The man who had once dominated every room, who had wielded his opinions like weapons, was suddenly speechless. Behind him, Audrey and Stan remained silent, watching their son face the consequences of his arrogance. "Sit down, Gary," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside his parents. "Let me show you exactly how your company ended up in this position." My voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who had nothing left to prove. He remained standing, his pride still fighting a losing battle. "I don't need a lecture from you about—" "About what?" I cut him off. "About digital transformation? The same transformation your competitors embraced while you dismissed it as a trend? About employee retention? While you were busy maintaining your family's power structure, your best talent was leaving in droves. About sustainable business practices? The contracts you lost because you couldn't adapt to changing market demands?" I pulled up another presentation on the screen, this one showing the parallel trajectories of my company's rise and Morrison Industries' decline. The lines crossed dramatically in the past year, telling a story that no amount of denial could ignore. "Everything," I continued, my voice steady, "everything that's happening to your company right now, I predicted in that proposal you laughed at. The one you called unrealistic and naive. Would you like to see it?" I didn't wait for his response before pulling out a folder from my desk drawer. Inside was my original proposal from that dinner 5 years ago, now annotated with dates and data showing how each of my predictions had come true. "Page 3, I said, laying it out on the desk. "I warned about the rise of digital-first competitors. Page 7, the importance of employee retention in maintaining client relationships. Page 12, the growing demand for sustainable business practices among major clients." Gary finally sank into the chair, his face ashen as he looked at the document. "You kept this? All this time?" "Of course I did," I replied. "Just like I kept every analysis I did of your company's decline, every news article about your failed projects, every report about your declining market share. I kept them because I knew this day would come." Audrey leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. You knew we would fail? I knew you would need to change or fail, I corrected her. You chose failure by refusing to change. And now here we are. I walked to my office window, looking out at the city skyline where both our company buildings stood. Mine rising, theirs falling. Do you want to know what I did differently? After that dinner, after you all finished laughing at my ideas, I went out and built everything you said couldn't work. I turned back to face them. Employee profit sharing? My company has? Sustainable business practices? We're industry leaders? Digital transformation? We wrote the book on it. Everything you mocked as unrealistic has become the foundation of my success. Gary's hands clenched into fists on his lap. So this is your revenge? Taking over our company? No, Gary. This isn't about revenge. This is about fixing what you broke. About showing that there's a better way to do business than the Morrison way. I sat back down at my desk. The takeover is happening. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or continue being part of the problem. Stan stirred in his chair. What exactly are you proposing? I pulled out 3 folders, placing them on the desk. These are my offers, one for each of you. Different roles in the new organization, but with one common requirement. You have to earn your positions. No more automatic authority because of your last name. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken realizations. These people, who had once sat in judgment of my ideas, were now being offered a chance to learn from them. And if we refuse? Gary asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. Then you'll be watching from the sidelines as I transform your family's legacy into everything you said was impossible. I met his gaze steadily. The choice is yours, but choose carefully. Your company's survival depends on it. I could see the battle playing out on their faces, pride warring with pragmatism, tradition fighting against the undeniable need for change. The Morrison way of doing business was dying, and I was offering them a chance to be part of its evolution. The board meets tomorrow, Stan said finally. They'll want to know our plan for moving forward. Then I suggest you take these folders home and read them carefully, I replied. Because tomorrow, one way or another, everything changes. That evening, after the Morrisons had left with their respective folders, I sat alone in my office reviewing every step that had led to this moment. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across my desk, where the copy of my original proposal still lay open. Each page was a reminder of how far I'd come from that humiliating dinner. My phone buzzed. A message from Fiona, my mentor and the woman who had helped me rebuild myself after that night. Heard the Morrisons paid you a visit. How did our plan play out? I smiled, remembering how I'd met Fiona. She had been one of Morrison Industries' most talented executives before Gary and Aaron had pushed her out, threatened by her innovative ideas and growing influence. Like me, she had been another casualty of the Morrison way of doing business. They looked exactly like we expected, I typed back. Desperate, defeated, but still clinging to their pride. You should have seen Gary's face when he realized I was the one buying them out. My mind drifted back to the day I had first found Fiona, 6 months after that devastating dinner. She had been working as a consultant, helping other companies implement the very changes the Morrisons had rejected. In her, I found not just a mentor, but a partner in transformation. Remember what you told me that first day? I messaged her. About turning wounds into wisdom? And look at you now, she replied. You didn't just heal, you built something revolutionary. How does it feel? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. The Morrison Industries building was still lit up, probably filled with anxious employees wondering about their future. They had no idea that the changes coming would actually benefit them. Profit sharing, career development, real opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than connections. It feels... I paused, searching for the right words. It feels like more than revenge. Like we're actually going to build something meaningful from their mistakes. My computer pinged with an incoming email, the first responses from the Morrison family. Audrey and Stan had signed their acceptance letters, agreeing to take on reduced roles in the new organization. They would need to prove themselves, just like everyone else. But at least they were willing to try. Gary's response was different. A lengthy email full of accusations and threats, ending with his resignation. "I won't work for my ex-wife," he had written. "Some things are more important than business." I forwarded his email to Fiona. Her response came quickly. "He still doesn't get it, does he? This was never about him. It was about building something better than what they destroyed." She was right. In the 5 years since that dinner, I had focused on creating rather than destroying. While the Morrisons were clinging to their outdated methods, I had been innovating, experimenting, proving that success could be achieved through collaboration rather than competition. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Williams, the transition team is ready for your call. They've finished their preliminary assessment of Morrison Industries." "Thank you," I replied. "Put them through." "To the conference room. I'll be there in a minute." Before heading to the meeting, I took one last look at my original proposal. The pages were slightly yellowed now, the ink a bit faded, but the ideas were as relevant as ever. Employee empowerment, sustainable practices, digital innovation, everything the Morrisons had mocked was about to become their company's salvation. I gathered my materials and walked to the conference room, my heels clicking on the marble floors. Through the glass walls, I could see my team waiting, bright, dedicated, professionals who had been chosen for their talents, not their connections. Many of them were former Morrison Industries employees who had jumped ship when they realized their potential would never be recognized there. As I entered the room, I caught my reflection in the glass, confident, composed, successful. So different from the woman who had fled that dinner in tears. The Morrisons had tried to define my worth by their standards, never realizing that their standards were what needed to change. "Good evening, everyone," I said, taking my place at the head of the table. "Let's talk about how we're going to transform Morrison Industries into something that should have existed all along." The transition team meeting lasted well into the night. As we dissected every aspect of Morrison Industries, something became increasingly clear. The company's problems ran deeper than even I had anticipated. It wasn't just their outdated business practices or resistance to change, it was an entire culture built on fear and suppression of innovation. "Look at these employee surveys," Sarah, my head of HR, pointed out. She had been one of the first people I'd hired after starting my company, specifically because she understood the importance of nurturing talent. "The pattern is striking. Any time someone proposed changes or innovations, they were either ignored or actively discouraged." I nodded, remembering my own experience. They didn't just discourage innovation, they punished it. "Show me the turnover rates for the past 5 years." The numbers were staggering. Morrison Industries had lost over 60% of their top talent in the past 3 years alone. Many had come to work for my company, bringing with them not just their skills but their frustrated dreams of what their old workplace could have been. "There's something else you should see," Tom, my financial analyst, interjected. He pulled up a series of graphs on the screen. "These are the investment patterns under Gary and Aaron's leadership. Notice anything strange?" I leaned forward, studying the data. They were investing heavily in maintaining old systems while their competitors were modernizing. Classic Morrison stubbornness. "Exactly," Tom confirmed. "But here's the interesting part. They had the resources to modernize. They chose not to. It wasn't just about being conservative. It was about maintaining control." As we delved deeper into the company's operations, a clear picture emerged of how the Morrison family had systematically destroyed their own legacy. Every decision had been filtered through the lens of maintaining family control, even when it meant sacrificing growth and innovation. My phone buzzed. Another message from Fiona. Interesting development. Just heard from an old contact at Morrison Industries. Stacy's been calling emergency meetings with middle management, trying to build support against the takeover. I couldn't help but smile. Typical Morrison response, trying to maintain control even as everything crumbled around them. Let her try, I typed back. The board votes tomorrow and we both know how that's going to go. Turning back to my team, I saw the same determination in their eyes that I'd felt 5 years ago. These were people who understood my vision, who had helped me build something different from the ground up. Tomorrow, I announced, we begin the real work. The board will vote to approve the takeover, and then we start transforming Morrison Industries into everything it could have been. The meeting wrapped up around midnight. As my team filed out, each clutching their assignments for the coming weeks, I stayed behind in the conference room. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, and somewhere out there, the Morrison family was grappling with the end of their era. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Lisa, one of my most valuable employees, and a former Morrison Industries junior executive who had been shut down when she proposed similar changes to the ones in my original proposal. "Ms. Williams?" she said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say, what you're doing, taking over Morrison Industries, implementing all these changes, it's what some of us dreamed about but never thought possible." I gestured for her to sit down. "Tell me about your time there, Lisa. What was it really like in the trenches?" For the next hour, Lisa shared stories that confirmed everything I had suspected about the toxic culture at Morrison Industries. Brilliant. Ideas dismissed because they came from the wrong people. Promotions based on family connections rather than merit. A pervasive fear of challenging the status quo. The worst part, she said, her voice thick with emotion, was watching good people give up. Seeing them accept that things would never change because the Morrison family wouldn't allow it. "Things are about to change," I assured her. "Everything. They fought against. Everything they mocked. It's all going to become reality." After Lisa left, I remained in the conference room, looking out at the city. Tomorrow would bring the board vote, but the real challenge would come after, transforming not just a company's practices, but its entire culture. My phone buzzed one final time for the night, a message from Stan. "The board is prepared to vote in favor of the takeover. Gary and Aaron are planning something, but they don't have the support they think they do. It's really happening, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied simply. "It's time for the Morrison legacy to become something more than what you imagined." The morning of the board vote dawned clear and bright. I arrived at my office early, knowing that this day would reshape not just Morrison Industries, but the entire business landscape of our city. As I reviewed my presentation for the board one last time, my assistant rushed in with urgent news. "Gary and Aaron have called a press conference," she said, handing me her tablet. "They're about to go live outside Morrison Industries." I turned on the wall-mounted screen just in time to see my ex-husband and his brother standing at a podium. Their faces set in grim determination. The old Morrison arrogance was still there, but now it had a desperate edge to it. "We're here to address the rumors about a hostile takeover of Morrison Industries," Gary began, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone. "Let me be clear. This is nothing more than a vindictive attempt by my ex-wife to destroy a family legacy that spans 3 generations." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Even now, facing the complete collapse of everything he had inherited, Gary still couldn't admit the real reason for his company's failure. "What my brother means," Aaron stepped in, "is that Morrison Industries is not for sale. We have strategies in place to address our current challenges. This attempted takeover is purely personal, driven by—" His voice trailed off as someone in the press corps interrupted. "But isn't it true that your company's market value has dropped by 60% under your leadership?" and that your ex-sister-in-law's company has implemented all the changes she proposed 5 years ago with remarkable success. The question came from a journalist I recognized, someone who had been following both companies' trajectories over the years. The look on Gary's face was priceless as more reporters began asking similar questions. Is it true that your board is meeting today to vote on the takeover? Can you address the mass exodus of talent from your company over the past 3 years? Why did Morrison Industries resist digital transformation while your competitors were modernizing? My phone buzzed, messages flooding in from board members who were watching the press conference. The general sentiment was clear. Gary and Aaron's desperate attempt to maintain control was backfiring spectacularly. Ms. Williams, my assistant, called from the doorway. Stacy Morrison is here. She's asking to speak with you before the board meeting. This was unexpected. Last I'd heard, Stacy had been trying to rally support against the takeover. I nodded. Send her in. Stacy entered my office looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had once mocked my business ideas at that family dinner. Her designer outfit seemed somehow ill-fitting now, as if she had shrunk inside it. I watched what you did with your company, she said without preamble. Everything you proposed that night, the changes we laughed at, you proved they could work. You proved we were wrong. I gestured for her to sit down. This isn't about proving anyone wrong anymore, Stacy. It's about fixing what's broken. That's why I'm here, she replied, pulling out a folder. These are documents Gary doesn't know I have. Evidence of exactly how he and Aaron systematically ignored warnings about the company's declining position. Reports from department heads about losing key clients. Everything that proves they chose their pride over the company's survival. I studied her carefully. Why are you showing me this? Because I finally understand what you tried to tell us that night, she said, her voice trembling slightly. This isn't just about family legacy or tradition. It's about building something that actually works, that serves more than just the people at the top. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. The Morrison Industries building was experiencing something unprecedented. Employees were leaving their desks, walking out in the middle of Gary and Aaron's press conference. We watched on my office screen as the camera panned to show dozens of people exiting the building, many of them carrying boxes with their belongings. It was a mass exodus, a clear message to the board about where the employees stood on the coming vote. Look at what they've done, Stacy whispered, watching the scene unfold. They'd rather destroy everything than admit they were wrong. The scene, playing out on my office screen, was surreal. Employees continued to stream out of Morrison Industries while Gary and Aaron struggled to maintain their composure at the podium. The press conference had devolved into chaos, with reporters shouting questions about the employee walkout and the impending board vote. Turn it off, I told my assistant. Turning to Stacy, I asked, Did you know this was going to happen? She shook her head, still staring at the now dark screen. No, but I'm not surprised. The employees have been waiting for something to change for years. When they heard about your potential takeover, about the changes you might bring, well, let's just say there's a reason Gary and Aaron didn't want them to know about the board vote. My phone buzzed with an urgent message from Stan. Board meeting moved up. They're convening in 30 minutes. Gary and Aaron don't know yet. They're still outside trying to control the PR disaster. I gathered my materials, including the folder Stacy had brought. Are you coming to the board meeting? I asked her. She straightened her shoulders, a glimmer of her old confidence returning, but tempered with something new, humility. Yes, but not to oppose you. I want to speak in favor of the takeover. The drive to Morrison Industries took us past the crowd of employees still gathered outside. Many of them recognized my car, and something extraordinary happened. They began to applaud. These were the people who had watched their ideas being dismissed, their talents ignored, their careers stagnating under the weight of Morrison family pride. In the boardroom, the tension was palpable. Most of the board members were already seated, their faces grave. Stan sat at his usual place at the head of the table, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Audrey sat quietly in a corner, her usual perfect posture slumped slightly. "Before we begin," Stan announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of leadership, "I want to acknowledge what we've all just witnessed. The employee walkout sends a clear message about the state of our company." The boardroom doors burst open. Gary and Aaron stormed in, their faces red with anger and humiliation. "This meeting isn't supposed to start for another 2 hours," Gary protested. The board voted to move it up, Stan replied calmly. "Given the circumstances, we felt it best to proceed immediately." I stood up, smoothing my suit. "Shall we begin? I believe everyone here has reviewed my proposal for the acquisition and transformation of Morrison Industries." "This is ridiculous," Aaron interjected. "You can't seriously be considering selling our family's legacy to her." One of the board members, a woman who had served Morrison Industries for over 20 years, spoke up. "Mr. Morrison, with all due respect, the legacy you're so concerned about protecting is precisely what's destroying this company." I opened my presentation, letting the numbers speak for themselves. 5 years of declining profits under Gary and Aaron's leadership, the loss of major clients, the exodus of top talent. And alongside these figures, the success metrics of my own company: growing market share, high employee retention, innovative projects that had transformed our industry. "What you see here," I explained, "is more than just a contrast in management styles. It's the difference between clinging to outdated methods and embracing necessary change. Everything I proposed 5 years ago, everything you laughed at during that family dinner, has been proven successful in my company." Gary slammed, his fist on the table. "This is personal. She's doing this for revenge." "No, Gary," I replied calmly. "This is business. Something you never fully understood. The changes I'm proposing aren't about revenge. They're about survival. Your company's survival." Stacy stood up then, surprising everyone. "I have something the board needs to see." She began distributing copies of the documents she'd brought to my office. "These show exactly how my brothers ignored warnings about our company's decline. How they actively suppressed innovation to maintain their control." The room fell silent as the board members reviewed the documents. Years of ignored warnings, dismissed proposals, rejected innovations, all documented in black and white. The evidence of how Gary and Aaron's leadership had systematically destroyed what their father had built. The silence in the boardroom was deafening as the members pored over Stacy's documents. Gary and Aaron stood frozen, their faces draining of color as they realized their sister had just delivered the final blow to their control over Morrison Industries. "Stacy," Gary's voice was dangerously quiet. "How could you do this to your own family?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm doing this for our family, Gary, for every employee who's part of the Morrison Industries family. The real question is, how could you and Aaron do this to them? To everything Dad built?" Stan cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I've sat quietly for too long, watching my sons destroy what took me a lifetime to build. I thought protecting the Morrison way of doing business meant preserving our traditions. I was wrong." He turned to face me, his expression heavy with regret. 5 years ago, at that dinner, we didn't just dismiss good business ideas. We showed exactly why our company needed to change. Our arrogance, our refusal to listen, our belief that the Morrison name alone guaranteed success. Those were the real problems. One of the board members, an elderly gentleman who had served alongside Stan for decades, spoke up. "I move that we proceed with the vote on the proposed takeover." "Second," called another voice, and suddenly the room was shifting, papers rustling, as board members prepared to cast their votes. "Wait!" Aaron's voice cracked with desperation. "You can't just erase 3 generations of Morrison leadership?" I stood up, commanding the room's attention. "No one's erasing anything, Aaron. The Morrison legacy will be preserved. not through outdated methods and rigid hierarchy, but through innovation and adaptation. The very things you fought against will become your company's salvation. The vote, when it came, was decisive. 13 in favor, 2 against. Gary and Aaron's vote standing alone against the tide of change. As the reality of their defeat sank in, I watched the last vestiges of their arrogance crumble. "The board has spoken," Stan announced, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Morrison Industries will proceed with the acquisition agreement, under Ms. Williams' leadership." Gary turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Not just fear of losing control, but fear of facing a world where his name alone didn't guarantee success. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now," I replied, "we begin the transformation. Every change you mocked, every innovation you dismissed, every improvement you rejected, they all get implemented. The question is, are you willing to be part of that transformation, or will you continue fighting against the inevitable?" Audrey, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke up. "Perhaps it's time we learned from the woman we once dismissed. Perhaps it's time we all learned a new way of doing business." I opened my laptop, pulling up the detailed transformation plan I'd prepared. First order of business, we establish a new corporate structure. No more decisions made in family dinners. No more promotions based on last names. Every position, from entry level to executive, will be earned through merit and innovation. The board members leaned forward, many of them nodding in approval. These were people who had watched helplessly as the Morrison brothers rejected progress in favor of tradition. Now they were seeing a path forward, a way to preserve what was valuable while embracing necessary change. Second, I continued, we implement the digital transformation strategy that was proposed 5 years ago. Every department will be modernized, every process updated. We'll invest in our employees, in their ideas, in their growth. As I outlined the changes to come, I could see the impact rippling through the room. Some faces showed relief, others, excitement, and a few, particularly Gary and Aaron, showed the painful recognition of opportunities squandered. Stacy raised her hand, her voice steady despite the emotion visible on her face. "I'd like to be part of this transformation. Not as a Morrison, but as someone who needs to earn her place in the new organization." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The official announcement of the takeover sent shockwaves through the business community. Headlines ranged from Morrison Empire Falls to Ex-Wife's Innovation Vision to Corporate Culture Revolution, how one woman's rejected ideas became industry standard. I had moved my office temporarily to the Morrison Industries building to oversee the transformation personally. It was strange sitting in what had once been Gary's office, now stripped of its heavy traditional furniture and transformed into a modern, open workspace. The wall that had once displayed generations of Morrison family portraits now held a digital screen showing real-time company metrics and employee innovation projects. "Ms. Williams," my assistant called through the intercom, "the first round of employee interviews is complete. You might want to see this." The reports she brought in told a story of systemic suppression of talent. Dozens of employees had come forward with innovations they'd tried to propose over the years, ideas that had been dismissed or buried under the Morrison leadership. "Look at this one," I said, pulling out a particularly interesting proposal. Sarah Chen from accounting proposed a digital transformation plan 2 years ago that's almost identical to what we're implementing now. The only difference is she was ignored, while I had the resources to prove it could work. My phone buzzed. A message from Fiona. "Just finished my first week assessing the middle management. You won't believe what these people have been sitting on. Years of innovative ideas, just waiting for someone to listen." I smiled, remembering my own experience of being dismissed. "Schedule a meeting with all department heads," I told my assistant. It's time to unlock all that suppressed potential. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Stan, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The burden of maintaining the Morrison way seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. "I've been visiting different departments," he said, settling into a chair. "Watching how you're changing things, it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "I thought you'd destroy everything we built. Instead, you're building something better on the foundation. You're doing what I should have done years ago." Before I could respond, another knock came. This time it was Stacy, clutching a folder and looking nervous, a far cry from her former confident demeanor. "I've finished the analysis you asked for," she said, placing the folder on my desk. In the weeks since the takeover, she had thrown herself into learning the business properly, starting from the ground up just like any other employee. "And?" I prompted. "You were right. About everything. The outdated systems alone were costing us millions annually. The hierarchical structure was stifling innovation. The resistance to change was killing us slowly." She paused, then added quietly, "I don't know how we didn't see it." "You saw what you wanted to see," I replied. "The Morrison way was comfortable, familiar. Change is hard, especially when you believe your way is the only way." My computer pinged with an incoming video call. The quarterly results from my original company. I connected it to the large screen, and soon the room was filled with positive metrics: growing market share, successful project launches, high employee satisfaction scores. "This," I said, gesturing to the screen, "is what we're going to build, here. Not by erasing the Morrison legacy, but by evolving it into something better." Stan studied the numbers carefully. "Gary and Aaron should see this," he said finally. "They're still struggling with everything that's happened." "They'll see it when they're ready," I replied. "Change comes harder to some than others." Just then, my assistant rushed in again. "Ms. Williams, you need to see this. The employee suggestion portal we launched last week? We've received over 300 submissions already." I opened the portal on my screen, scrolling through proposal after proposal. Ideas for process improvements, customer service innovations, sustainability initiatives, all the things that had been suppressed under the old regime were finally finding their voice. The employee suggestions proved to be a goldmine of innovation. As I reviewed them with my transition team, patterns began to emerge, clear indicators of where the Morrison leadership had failed to adapt. But more importantly, they showed the path forward. "Look at this cluster of ideas from the tech department," I pointed out during our morning meeting. "They've been sitting on solutions to our digital infrastructure problems for years. The only thing holding them back was the old management's resistance to change." Maria, my head of innovation, whom I'd brought over from my original company, nodded in agreement. "It's not just tech. Every department has similar stories. It's like we're unlocking a vault of suppressed potential." Just then, my assistant appeared, at the door with an unexpected announcement. "Aaron Morrison is here to see you. He says it's important." I felt a moment of surprise. Aaron had been notably absent since the takeover, refusing to participate in any transition meetings. "Send him in." Aaron entered my office looking different from the arrogant executive I remembered. His expensive suit seemed to hang loosely on his frame, and the confident strut was gone from his walk. "I've been watching," he said without preamble, settling into a chair across from my desk. "Everything you're implementing, the changes, the new systems, the way you're listening to employees, it's working." I studied him carefully, looking for signs of the old Morrison resistance. "What made you finally see it?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I visited our biggest former client yesterday, the one we lost 6 months ago. Know where I found them? In your other company's lobby, signing a partnership agreement. They were implementing exactly the kind of digital solutions we had refused to consider." I nodded, remembering how that particular client had pleaded with Morrison Industries to modernize their services. And what did that tell you? That we were wrong, not just about the business, but about you. He pulled out a worn folder. I recognized it as my original proposal from that dinner 5 years ago. I kept this, you know. Read it again last night. Everything you predicted, everything we laughed at, you saw it all coming. The admission hung in the air between us. Aaron Morrison, who had once dismissed my ideas with a contemptuous chuckle, was finally acknowledging the truth. I want to learn, he said suddenly. Not as a Morrison, not as a former executive, but as someone who needs to understand how business really works in today's world. Will you teach me? The request caught me off guard. Of all the Morrison family members, Aaron had been Gary's strongest ally in maintaining the old ways. His asking for help represented a significant shift. The learning program starts at the bottom, I warned him. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll work alongside the same employees you once ignored. I understand, he nodded. That's actually what I want. To see everything I missed while sitting in my corner office. My phone buzzed. Another message from Fiona. Employee satisfaction scores just came in. Up 40% since the takeover. People are finally feeling heard. I showed Aaron the message, watching his reaction. This is what happens when you value people's ideas more than family tradition, I explained. When you build a culture of innovation rather than intimidation. He stared at the numbers, and I could see the final pieces clicking into place in his mind. The Morrison way of doing business, the hierarchy, the resistance to change, the dismissal of new ideas, had been slowly killing the company from within. There's an orientation session for new department heads next week, I said finally. But you won't be attending as a head. You'll be there as a trainee. Are you ready for that? Aaron straightened in his chair, and for the first time, I saw something new in his expression. Humility mixed with determination. Yes, it's time I learned what you tried to teach us 5 years ago. The news of Aaron's decision to join the training program spread quickly through both companies. His first day as a trainee sent a powerful message throughout the organization. No one was too important to learn, to grow, to change. I watched from my office window as he arrived that morning, no longer in his expensive suit but dressed in business casual like any other employee. He joined a group of new trainees in the lobby, most of whom had once reported to him, and the awkwardness was palpable even from 40 stories up. Ms. Williams, my assistant called through the intercom. Gary's here. He's demanding to see his brother. I hadn't seen Gary since the board vote. He'd been conspicuously absent from all transition meetings, sending his lawyers to handle necessary communications. Send him up, I replied, curious about what had finally brought him to my door. Gary burst into my office moments later, his face flushed with anger. What kind of game are you playing? He demanded. Turning my own brother into some entry-level trainee? Aaron made that choice himself, I replied calmly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. He saw what you still refuse to see, that the old way of doing things is over. The old way built this company. Gary's voice rose, the familiar Morrison arrogance surfacing. 3 generations of success, and you're dismantling it all because of some personal vendetta. I pulled up the company's latest performance metrics on my screen, turning it so he could see. Look at these numbers, Gary. Really look at them. Employee satisfaction up 40%. Innovation submissions increased by 300%. Client retention stabilizing. For the first time in 3 years. Numbers can be manipulated, he scoffed, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Then how about this? I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a stack of letters. These are from your former employees, people who left because their ideas were ignored, their potential stifled. They're asking to come back now that things are changing. Gary picked up one of the letters, his hands trembling slightly as he read. I recognized the name at the bottom, Thomas Chen, one of their most brilliant software developers who had quit after Gary dismissed his digital transformation proposal. You remember Thomas, don't you? I asked. He tried to tell you 3 years ago that the company needed to modernize its systems. You told him to stick to coding and leave strategy to the Morrisons. He works for my other company now, leading our most successful digital innovation team. The weight of missed opportunities seemed to settle on Gary's shoulders. And Aaron? He's really starting over? As a trainee? He's learning what you could learn too, if you were willing to put aside your pride, I said softly. This isn't about erasing the Morrison legacy, Gary. It's about evolving it into something better. My phone buzzed. A message from Aaron, sent from his orientation session. I get it now. Everything we refused to see. Everything we could have been. Thank you for this chance. I showed Gary the message, watching as various emotions played across his face. Anger, confusion, and finally, perhaps a glimmer of understanding. You were right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. That night at dinner, when you presented your ideas, you saw where business was heading. We were too proud, too stuck in our ways to listen. It's not too late to listen now, I replied. The training program has room for one more. Gary stood up abruptly, straightening his jacket. I need time to think, he said, turning toward the door. But he paused before leaving, looking back at me. The company, it's in better hands now than it was with us, isn't it? It's in the hands of people who understand that success comes from embracing change, not fighting it, I answered. People who know that good ideas can come from anywhere, not just the top floor. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, I found myself walking through the transformed Morrison Industries offices. The changes weren't just cosmetic. You could feel it in the energy of the place, in the way spaces had been redesigned to encourage collaboration rather than enforce hierarchy. The old executive floor, once a fortress of closed doors and private offices, had been converted into an open innovation hub, where portraits of Morrison patriarchs once hung. Digital screens now displayed ongoing projects and employee achievements. The massive mahogany conference table where I'd once presented my naive ideas had been replaced with modular furniture that could be rearranged for different types of meetings. My phone buzzed. A message from Stacy. You need to see this. Employee break room now. Curious, I took the elevator down to the main floor. As I approached the break room, I heard something unexpected. Laughter. Not the forced, polite kind that used to echo through Morrison family dinners, but genuine, uninhibited joy. I found Stacy standing in the doorway, watching a scene that would have been unthinkable a few weeks ago. Aaron, still in his trainee clothes, was sitting with a group of employees, listening intently as a young software developer explained her ideas for improving their customer service platform. Remember when we used to call these complaint sessions? Stacy whispered to me. When employees gathering together was seen as a threat to management? I nodded, remembering how the old Morrison leadership had discouraged any unofficial meetings, viewing them as potential breeding grounds for dissent. Look at him, Stacy continued, gesturing toward Aaron. He's actually taking notes. Aaron Morrison, taking notes from a junior employee. Dad would have had a heart attack. Just then, my assistant appeared with urgent news. The quarterly projections are in, she said, handing me her tablet. And there's something else. Gary sent an email to all employees. I quickly scanned the projections first. They were even better than expected. The company's transformation was already showing results, with key metrics improving across all departments. But it was Gary's email that really caught my attention. To all Morrison Industries employees, it began. For 3 generations, the Morrison name has stood for tradition, stability, and unwavering commitment to doing things our way. Today, I am writing to acknowledge that our way was wrong. The email continued. detailing how pride and fear of change had blinded the Morrison leadership to evolving business realities. It was surprisingly honest, surprisingly humble, everything the old Gary wasn't. Most importantly, the email concluded, "I want to apologize to every employee whose ideas we dismissed, whose potential we stifled, whose innovation we feared. You deserved better leadership. Now, under Ms. Williams's guidance, you finally have it." "He actually sent this to everyone?" Stacy asked, reading over my shoulder. Gary Morrison, admitting he was wrong? Before I could respond, Aaron joined us, having noticed our presence. "I just saw the email," he said. "I talked to him last night after my first day of training. He's different. We all are." I studied Aaron's face, seeing the truth of his words. The arrogant executive who had once sneered at employee suggestions was gone, replaced by someone who understood the value of learning from others. "There's something else you should see," my assistant said, pulling up another report. "Remember those innovation submissions we've been collecting? The development team did an analysis. Over 60% of them are ideas that were previously rejected under Morrison leadership. Ideas that could have prevented the company's decline if they'd been implemented when first proposed. The revelation about the rejected innovations hit hard. Looking through them, I could trace the exact points where Morrison Industries had chosen pride over progress, tradition over transformation. Each rejected idea represented not just a missed opportunity, but a moment when employee potential had been stifled. "Look at this one," I said to Stacy and Aaron, pulling up a particularly striking example. 3 years ago, Lisa Chen from marketing proposed a complete digital customer engagement strategy, the same strategy that my company used to capture Morrison's biggest clients. Aaron's face paled as he recognized the proposal. "I remember this. Gary and we didn't just reject it, we mocked it in the executive meeting, said it was typical millennial thinking that would cheapen the Morrison brand. And now," I prompted, pulling up current market data. "Now digital engagement is everything," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Every client we lost cited our outdated communication methods as a major reason for leaving." My phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. Gary had just signed up for the training program. The timestamp showed he'd done it right after sending his company-wide email. Stacy gasped when I showed them. "Both Morrison brothers starting over as trainees? The business papers will have a field day with this." "This isn't about headlines," I replied. "It's about learning what you should have known all along, that good leadership means listening to every voice, not just the ones with the right last name." Just then, Fiona appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but you all need to see this." She led us to the main floor where something remarkable was happening. Employees were gathering around the innovation hub, pinning papers to the newly installed idea boards. But these weren't new proposals. They were old ones, previously rejected under Morrison leadership. Each one came with a sticky note showing when it was originally proposed and how it could have benefited the company. "They're calling it the Wall of Missed Opportunities," Fiona explained. "It started spontaneously after Gary's email went out." I walked along the wall, reading proposal after proposal. Digital transformation strategies, employee engagement initiatives, sustainability, programs. Everything I had once proposed at that fateful dinner echoed in dozens of employee voices that had also been silenced. "This is overwhelming," Aaron murmured, reading alongside me. "All these ideas, all this potential, just waiting to be recognized." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "From now on, every idea gets fair consideration. Every voice gets heard. That's how we'll rebuild Morrison Industries." My assistant appeared with more news. "The first employee town hall is ready to start. Everyone's gathered in the main conference room. This would be my first address to the entire company since the takeover." As we headed to the conference room, I could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about announcing changes. It was about healing wounds, restoring trust, and building something new from the ashes of the old Morrison way. The conference room was packed, with employees spilling into the hallway. The energy was different from any Morrison Industries meeting I'd ever attended. There was anticipation rather than fear, hope rather than resignation. As I took my place at the podium, I saw Aaron and Stacy slip quietly into the back row, no longer assuming their place at the front as Morrison family members. Gary was there too, I realized with surprise, standing unobtrusively among the employees he had once ruled over. Looking out at their faces, the developers whose innovations had been dismissed, the managers whose insights had been ignored, the support staff whose potential had been overlooked, I knew exactly what needed to be said. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. I sat at a Morrison family dinner and presented ideas for transforming this company. Ideas about digital innovation, employee empowerment, and sustainable business practices. Those ideas were met with laughter and dismissal. Today, I stand before you not to say, "I told you so," but to say, "Let's build something better together." The room was completely silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on me. Among them, I could see the veterans who had weathered years of Morrison management, alongside newer employees who had never known anything but frustration with the old system. Every person in this room has ideas worth hearing, I continued. Every one of you has insights that could help shape the future of this company. The days of top-down management and closed-door decisions are over. From now on, innovation can come from anywhere, and good ideas will be recognized regardless of their source. I gestured to the screens behind me, which displayed the new company structure, a flatter, more collaborative organization that emphasized merit over hierarchy. You've already seen some changes: the innovation hub, the suggestion portal, the open door policy. But these are just the beginning. Today, I want to announce several new initiatives that will reshape how we work together. I outlined the plans we'd been developing: a company-wide profit-sharing program, a career development track that allowed for both vertical and horizontal growth, and a dedicated innovation fund that any employee could apply to for project development. But perhaps the most significant change, I said, pausing for effect, is happening right here in this room. Look around you. Do you see the reserved executive seating, the special treatment for family members, the artificial barriers between departments? People glanced around, suddenly realizing that even the physical arrangement of the room had changed. There was no more hierarchical seating, no special section for management. Those barriers are gone because they never should have existed in the first place. Talent, innovation, and dedication aren't confined to corner offices or family names. They exist throughout this company, in every department, at every level. I saw heads nodding, small smiles appearing on faces that had long ago learned to hide their reactions in company meetings. Some of you may have seen the wall of missed opportunities that's appeared in our innovation hub. Those rejected proposals represent more than just missed chances. They represent a culture that we're leaving behind. Starting today, every proposal gets fair consideration. Every voice gets heard. Every contribution gets recognized. I noticed Gary shift uncomfortably in his spot near the back wall, but he didn't look away. If anything, he seemed to be listening more intently than ever. You may have also heard that some former executives, including members of the Morrison family, have joined our training program. They're starting from the ground up, learning what many of you have known all along: that real business understanding comes from experiencing every level of operations, not just viewing them from above. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd as people glanced at Aaron and Gary, both standing among their former employees as equals for the first time. This transformation won't be easy. Change never is. But I promise you this: every person in this room will have the opportunity to contribute, to grow, to prove their worth. Not through family connections or office politics, but through their ideas, their work, and their dedication. I pulled up the final slide. Our new company values, prominently featuring innovation, collaboration, and respect for all contributions. The Morrison name may be on the building for now, but this company belongs to all of us. Its future will be shaped by all of us. And together, we're going to build something remarkable. The response to the town hall was immediate and overwhelming. As soon as the meeting ended, employees flooded the Innovation Hub with new proposals, each one building on the ideas and opportunities I had outlined. The energy in the building was electric, unlike anything Morrison Industries had ever seen. "Ms. Williams," my assistant called, hurrying to catch up with me as I left the conference room. "The response rate to the new employee engagement platform is off the charts. We've received more submissions in the last hour than the old system got in a year." I smiled, remembering how the previous management had complained about employee apathy when their suggestion box remained empty. It wasn't apathy, it was learned helplessness, born from years of having their ideas ignored or dismissed. "There's something else," she added, lowering her voice. "Audrey Morrison is waiting in your office. She says it's important." I found Audrey standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. She turned as I entered, and I was struck by how different she seemed from the imperious woman who had once dismissed me at family dinners. "That was quite a speech," she said quietly. "Very different from how we used to run things." "That's the point," I replied, settling behind my desk. "Everything needs to be different. I've been watching," she continued, taking a seat across from me. "The changes you're making, the way you're involving everyone, it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Revenge," she admitted. "I thought you'd destroy everything the Morrison name stood for. Instead, you're building something better than we ever managed to create." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message. The first wave of quarterly reports since the takeover had been finalized, and the results were stunning. Employee retention was up 45%, innovation metrics had skyrocketed, and most surprisingly, several former clients had reached out about returning. "Look at these numbers," I said, turning my screen so Audrey could see. "This is what happens when you unleash the potential that was always here, just waiting to be recognized." Audrey studied the figures, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about that dinner 5 years ago, about how quickly we dismissed your ideas, how certain we were that the Morrison way was the only way. And now? Now I'm watching my sons start over as trainees, learning from the very people they once ignored. I'm seeing employees excited to come to work, eager to contribute. I'm realizing that everything we thought made us special, our name, our traditions, our way of doing things, was actually holding us back." Just then, there was a commotion outside my office. Through the glass walls, I could see a crowd gathering around the Innovation Hub. Aaron was there, still in his trainee clothes, engaged in an animated discussion with a group of developers. Is Aaron actually smiling?" Audrey asked, incredulous. We moved closer to the window to watch. Aaron was pointing at something on one of the developers' tablets, his face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. The developers, for their part, showed no sign of the fearful deference they would have displayed just weeks ago. "He's learning," I explained. "They all are. What it means to really collaborate, to value ideas regardless of their source, to build something together rather than dictate from above." "I want to learn too," Audrey said suddenly. "Not as a Morrison, not as someone's mother, but as someone who needs to understand how business really works in today's world." I studied her carefully, looking for any trace of the old Morrison pride. Instead, I saw something new: humility and a genuine desire to change. "The training program starts at the bottom," I warned her. "No shortcuts, no special treatment." "Good," she replied firmly. It's time I earned my place rather than assumed. First, the transformation of Morrison Industries continued at a remarkable pace. With every passing week, the old hierarchy crumbled further, replaced by a culture of collaboration and innovation that would have been unthinkable under the previous leadership. One morning, about 2 months after the takeover, I arrived at the office to find an unexpected sight. Gary, Aaron, and Audrey Morrison were all sitting together in the employee break room, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with a group of junior developers. "You need to see this," Fiona said, appearing at my side. "They're reviewing the digital transformation proposal, the same one the Morrison leadership rejected 3 years ago. But this time, they're actually listening." We stood watching through the glass as Gary, the man who had once declared such ideas naive, leaned forward eagerly, asking questions and taking notes. The developers, initially hesitant, had grown animated in their explanations, their previous fear of the Morrison family replaced by professional confidence. "It's like watching a completely different family," I mused. "They are different," Fiona replied. "You didn't just transform the company, you transformed them." My phone buzzed with an urgent message from my assistant. "Emergency board meeting called. Major client announcement." In the boardroom, I found the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Stan was there, along with the rest of the board members who had supported the takeover. But it was the presence of Thomas Chen, our former largest client, that drew everyone's attention. "Ms. Williams," Thomas began, standing to address the room. "3 years ago, we left Morrison Industries because it refused to adapt to changing market demands. Today, we've watched this company transform into everything we hoped it could be." He pulled out a contract, a massive service agreement that would not only restore their business, but expand it significantly. "But this isn't just about returning our business," he continued. "We want to be part of this transformation. The changes you've implemented, the culture you've created, it's exactly what the industry needs." As the details of the contract were discussed, I noticed Gary slip quietly into the back of the room. He stood listening, his expression a mixture of regret and understanding. This was the client he had lost, the warning sign he had ignored, the wake-up call that had come too late. After the meeting, he approached me. "I've been reviewing our old client departure files," he said. "Every single one of them cited reasons you warned us about at that dinner. Every single one." "It was never about being right, Gary," I replied. "It was about building something that worked for everyone, not just the people at the top." "I know that now," he nodded. "The training program. It's opened my eyes. Sitting with developers, learning from people I used to ignore, I'm finally understanding what real business leadership means." My assistant appeared with more news. The employee suggestion portal had just logged its 1,000th submission since the takeover. Ideas were flowing freely now, unrestricted by the fear and hierarchy that had once suppressed them. "Come see this," I told Gary, leading him to the Innovation Hub. The space was buzzing with activity, filled with people from all levels of the company working together on new projects. "Remember how we used to run things?" I asked. "How every decision had to go through family approval? How ideas died in middle management because no one dared challenge the Morrison way?" He nodded, watching as Aaron, his own brother, sat collaboratively with a team of junior analysts, his trainee badge still pinned to his shirt. "Now look at what happens when you let people's talent shine," I continued. "When you value ideas over titles, innovation over tradition." Later that day, I called a special meeting of the transition team. The success of Thomas Chen's return had sparked an important realization. It was time to make the transformation official in every way. "We need to discuss rebranding," I announced to the assembled group, which now included both longtime employees and former Morrison executives. "The Morrison name on the building is a reminder of the old way of doing things. It's time for a change." The room fell silent. Even after everything that had happened, this felt like a final, decisive break with the past. Stan, who had been quietly supportive of most changes, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I know this isn't an easy conversation," I continued, "but our company identity needs to reflect who we are now, not who we were." To everyone's surprise, it was Gary who spoke up first. "She's right," he said, his voice carrying a conviction I'd never heard before. "The Morrison name, it represents everything we needed to leave behind. Pride over progress, tradition over innovation, family connection over genuine merit." "But 3 generations of business history," Stan began. "3 generations of doing things the wrong way," Aaron interrupted, standing to address the room. "Look at what we've accomplished in just 2 months since the takeover. Employee satisfaction at record highs, innovation flowing freely, former clients returning. None of that happened under the Morrison banner." My phone buzzed. Another set of metrics had just come in. I projected them onto the screen. Employee retention up another 15%, project completion rates improved by 40%, client satisfaction scores at their highest level in company history. "These numbers tell a story," I explained. "Not about the fall of a family business, but about the rise of something better. Something built on collaboration, innovation, and shared success." Audrey, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "What would you call it?" she asked. "The new company?" I smiled, pulling up a presentation I'd been preparing. "I was thinking we could let the employees decide. After all, it's their company too now." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic nods around the room. Even Stan managed a small smile. "But before we open it up for suggestions," I continued, "I want to be clear about what we're building here. This isn't about erasing history. It's about creating a future. A future where good ideas can come from anywhere, where innovation isn't bounded by hierarchy, where success is truly shared." Just then, my assistant rushed in with breaking news. The story of our transformation had been picked up by major business publications. Headlines flashed across my screen. "Corporate Culture Revolution: How One Woman's Rejected Ideas Transformed an Industry Giant," and "The End of Dynasty: A New Model for Business Leadership." "They're calling it a case study in modern business transformation," my assistant explained, handing me the latest reports. "Business schools are already asking to document our change process." Gary picked up one of the articles, reading aloud. "The Morrison Industries transformation represents more than just a company's evolution. It's a blueprint for how traditional businesses can adapt and thrive in the modern era." "They're missing the point," I said, drawing everyone's attention. "This isn't just about modernizing business practices. It's about recognizing that good ideas can come from anywhere, that innovation thrives when barriers fall, that true leadership means listening, more than commanding." The room fell silent as the weight of these words sank in. We weren't just changing a company's name or updating its practices. We were fundamentally reimagining what a business could be. The company rebranding announcement created a buzz of excitement throughout the organization. We had set up a digital platform where employees could submit and vote on new names, and the response was overwhelming. But what truly caught my attention weren't the name suggestions themselves, but the thoughtful explanations behind them. "You need to see this," my assistant said one morning, pulling up the submission portal. "People aren't just suggesting names. They're sharing stories about what the company's transformation has meant to them." I scrolled through the entries, each one more moving than the last. A junior developer wrote about finally feeling heard after years of silence. A veteran manager described the joy of being able to mentor younger employees without fear of threatening the hierarchy. Even the maintenance staff had submitted ideas, their insights proving that innovation truly could come from anywhere. My phone buzzed. A message from Fiona. "Have you seen today's numbers? The market is responding to our transformation in ways we never expected." The metrics were astounding. Our stock price had not only recovered from the Morrison-era decline, but was reaching new heights. Industry analysts were calling it the innovation premium, investors betting on the future of a company that had proven change was possible. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Stacy, carrying a thick folder. "Remember these?" she asked, laying out a series of documents on my desk. I recognized them immediately. Copies of my original proposal from that fateful dinner 5 years ago. "I had the team do an analysis," she continued. "Every single innovation you proposed that night has now been implemented, and every single one has exceeded performance expectations." Before I could respond, another knock came. This time it was Aaron, looking energized despite the early hour. "The junior developers just cracked something amazing," he said excitedly. "That digital transformation challenge we've been wrestling with? They found a solution that's so elegant, so simple. I can't believe we didn't see it before." "You mean you can't believe you didn't listen before?" I corrected gently. "These ideas were always there. The only thing that changed is that now they have a voice." My assistant appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Williams, the final rebranding proposals are ready for review. And there's something else. Gary's here. He says it's important." Gary entered looking different than I'd ever seen him. Gone was the arrogant executive who had once dismissed my ideas with a laugh. In his place stood someone who had learned the hardest kind of lesson: humility. "I've been thinking about that dinner," he said without preamble. "Not just about how wrong we were, but about what it represented. We weren't just dismissing your ideas, we were clinging to a way of doing business that was already dead." He pulled out his own copy of my original proposal, the pages worn from repeated reading. "Every problem you identified, every solution you proposed, every change you suggested, it was all there. We were too proud to see it. And now?" I prompted. "Now I understand what real business leadership means. It's not about maintaining control or protecting tradition. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute, where innovation isn't just allowed, but encouraged." The irony of hearing my own words from 5 years ago echoed back by Gary wasn't lost on me. But this wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about transformation, not just of a company, but of people. 1 year to the day after the takeover, I stood in the lobby of our headquarters, watching as workers carefully removed the last traces of the Morrison name from the building. The new company name, chosen democratically by our employees, would be unveiled at today's anniversary celebration. "Ready for the big reveal?" Fiona asked, joining me by the window. "The media's already gathering outside." I nodded, thinking about how far we'd come. The company had not just survived its transformation, it had thrived beyond anyone's expectations. Our market value had tripled, employee retention was at record highs, and we'd become known as an industry leader in innovation and workplace culture. "Ms. Williams," my assistant called, "everyone's assembled in the main hall." The space that had once hosted stuffy Morrison family gatherings had been transformed into a modern conference center. Today, it was packed with employees from every level of the company, all buzzing with anticipation. I took my place at the podium, looking out at the faces before me. Gary, Aaron, and Stacy sat not in their old reserved section, but among their teams. Gary with the strategy group he now contributed to, Aaron with his fellow developers, and Stacy with the marketing team she'd earned her way onto. 1 year ago, I began, we started a journey together, not just to save a company, but to reimagine what a company could be. Today, we celebrate not just our success, but the proof that change is possible when we dare to challenge the old ways of doing things. I gestured to the screens behind me where photos began to play. Images from the past year showing the company's transformation. Employees collaborating in the Innovation Hub. Former executives learning from junior staff. Teams celebrating shared successes. But perhaps the most powerful change isn't visible in our metrics or market value. It's in the way we work together, the way we value every voice, the way we've proven that good ideas can come from anywhere. I saw heads nodding throughout the room, knowing smiles exchanged between colleagues who had experienced this transformation firsthand. Today, as we unveil our new name, we're not just rebranding a company. We're celebrating a new way of doing business, one built on collaboration, innovation, and respect for every contribution. The screens changed, revealing the new company name, Horizon Innovations. Simple, forward-looking, chosen by overwhelming employee consensus. This name represents not just who we are, but who we're becoming, I continued. Every day brings new possibilities, new ideas, new chances to prove that success comes not from clinging to tradition, but from embracing change. As applause filled the room, I caught Gary's eye in the crowd. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not just of my success, but of how wrong he had been that night at dinner 5 years ago. After the ceremony, as employees celebrated throughout the building, I returned to my office. On my desk lay a frame. Inside was my original proposal from that dinner, preserved as a reminder of where this journey began. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Fiona. "Look out your window." I did, and there it was. Our new company, name being unveiled on the building's facade, gleaming in the sunlight. Below it, smaller but equally significant, were the words that had become our guiding principle. Where every voice matters, every idea counts. The woman they had once called worthless had not only proven her worth, but had shown an entire company how to recognize the worth in others. That dinner 5 years ago hadn't just changed my life, it had sparked a transformation that would influence business culture for generations to come. And that was worth more than any revenge could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.